Today, the topic that I'm going to talk about is deontology to political obligation. I mean, deontological theory to political obligation. So, at the beginning, I think a number of classes have already happened. So, I'm not going to talk much deeper into political obligation. But in a nutshell, political obligation is a sort of moral duty to obey the law of the land. So this is a very precise, you can say, definition of political obligation. And there are good many thinkers who are in fact associated with it, and who have contributed a lot in the discourse of political obligation. So today we should rather focus more precisely on deontology. Now, what is deontology? In fact, deontology here, this particular, as far as etymology of this particular word is concerned, there are two separate terms in this particular word. One is deon, D-E-O-N, and another is logy. So, deon means duty, and deon is basically a Greek word which means duty, whereas this logical or the later part of this particular phrase is concerned, it is basically, it means science or kind of study. So whatever it may be, either science or study, combinedly it denotes that deontology means it's a sort of study relating to duty. So from the etymological origin, you can say that deontology means a sort of duty. You can say when citizens are duty bound. So the prime focus of deontology is that citizens of a particular land should be duty bound. Now, what is the nature of the duty, and what would be the basic obligations towards fulfilling this? That would be a matter of discussion. But political obligation, so in a very, very nutshell, deontology says that political obligation must be justified in terms of an account of our duties. So it is the very precise meaning of deontology, or you can say the central idea of deontology is that political obligation must be justified in terms of our duties, in terms of an account of our duties, right? So deontological ethics, when we talk about deontology, basically it is an ethics. So deontological ethics holds that at least some acts are moral obligated, regardless of their consequences for human welfare. Look, there are two things. One is the means, one is the end. Okay, so when we do something, then we have these two things in our mind. One is the end, or the consequence of that particular happening in which we are associated, and the means through which we are going to achieve that particular end. So these are the two things which are associated with everything, whatever we do. One is means, one is end. Now, the consequentialists, there is another group of thinkers who are called consequentialists, or you can say teleologist. So you all know Aristotle as a teleological thinker. So teleologists would say that the ends should always define the means, as Machiavelli puts it, right? Machiavelli also thought in that particular fashion. But unlike the teleologists, deontological theorists would say that means are much more important than the ends. They have absolutely nothing to do with the end. You cannot just justify your means by virtue of your end. For example, if someone murders someone and say that that particular person who is murdered is a criminal, and since he is a criminal, then probably murdering somebody is not a good idea. It should not be justice. But since that person is a criminal, so naturally that act is not a criminal act. So that particular act cannot be termed as criminal since that person is a criminal. If someone tries to justify by this particular argument, then teleologists would say it is fine, because this is basically a teleological argument, that since that person is criminal, that is why if someone murders that particular person, there is nothing bad, nothing wrong. But deontologists would say that since that person is a criminal, it will not justify the act of murder. Okay, so murder is a murder. So that particular means that murder, the act of murder. This particular act cannot be justified at all, whether that person is a criminal or somebody else. So the end, what is your objective, doesn't matter. What you have done, what is your means, that is what is very, very important. So deontologists always try to figure out what is good, what is a good mean and what is a bad means. So they are not concerned about the consequences of the event. So what is the result of the event, they have nothing to do with that. So that is why I said that deontological ethics is basically they feel that there are some acts which are more obligatory regardless of their consequences for human nature. So you always, in fact, if you go by the teleologists, then you would say, in a particular society some people are making trouble, so you have every right to punish them. But you don't have that sort of authority to punish everybody for who are making chaos according to you. So teleologists would say this act is nothing wrong in that. But deontologists would say no, you cannot do it because you are duty bound. You don't have that much authority to do it because yes, you don't have control over the consequences, but you should be very, very careful about your means. Whatever means you are using, you have to use the proper means. I mean good means. You have to differentiate between good and bad, good acts and bad acts. So binary differentiation. One is, in this world, in fact in this existence, you would find that everything rests in binary. If there is good, then there is bad. If there is day, there is night. So if there is positive, then there is absolutely negative. If there is thesis, then there is antithesis. So everything, whatever you can see or perceive in this world, are in the form of binary. So basically you have to differentiate. You have to be able to differentiate between the good from the bad, and you have to always go by the virtue of good. That is why this particular ethics or deontological ethics, if I go by few examples of deontological ethics, then there are three things that I can mention. That you have to perform duty for duty's sake. Okay, when I say you have to be duty bound, you say why? Why should I be duty bound? I say that you have to be duty bound and you have to do your duty for the sake of your duty. Okay, you are doing duty for the sake of duty. So there is nothing, you are not someone who is thinking about consequences. Okay, so you are not doing things for the consequence, for the results. In fact, in Vedantic philosophy, there is a particular conception of Karma Yoga. In that conception of Karma Yoga, Lord Krishna, he explained that during the Kurukshetra war to Arjun, that Karma Yoga means you have to do karma. and just forgetting about the consequences or its phal, I mean its fruits. Forget about the fruits and only concentrate about your karma. The same thing is happening here. You are duty bound. You are thinking just about the duties, and duty is basically is a mean for you. It is not the end. And whatever fruits or whatever consequences are coming, you have no control over them. And that is why forget about the consequences and just concentrate about your doings. If you could be able to do good things, you are a duty bound fellow and you are able to differentiate between good and bad, and you are just doing the good acts, then the consequences will be automatically good. So, and that is why if you are doing wrong things and you are expecting that there will be good consequences, that is not going to happen. Okay, since that is not going to happen, just it is better for you to concentrate over doing good things. So that is the central idea, right? And the second example that I can give you is that the virtue is its own reward. Sometimes we say that, in fact, all the older political philosophers, they used to say that virtue is its own reward. And if you question that why I should be virtuous, why should someone be virtuous, what is the necessity of being virtuous? If I don't become virtuous or don't act like a virtuous man, then what would happen? Nothing would happen, because this world is basically composed of binary particles. If there is yes, then there is obviously no. There is nothing in between. If there is yes, there is. In fact, your computer is also only understands the binary language, 0 and 1. So everything is in binary. Therefore, virtue, if you become virtuous or you don't become virtuous, there is no problem. You have both the options. But deontologists believe that you have to be virtuous for the sake of virtue. In fact, if you be a virtuous person, then definitely it's a reward for you. So being virtuous in itself is a reward. So that is the idea. Okay, why should I be a good moral character? If I question this, in fact, during our school days, at the end of our class or end of our batch, either it is 10th or 12th, our headmaster used to provide us character certificates. And in most of in fact all the character certificates, there is one thing which was permanent, that was good and moral character. But what is, if that is a permanent statement, then what is the necessity of using that again and again for every fellow, every students? The reason is that this is the reason that I mentioned. The virtue is its own reward. So by stating that in that particular fashion, it guarantees the virtuousness of that particular student. Okay, so that is why deontologists believe that virtue is its own reward. So if you are a virtuous person, that itself is a reward for you, and that is why you have to be virtuous. And the third one is that let justice be done though heaven fall. Okay, that is why you could see that in our judicial system there is a symbol who has a libra, that lady with a libra and eyes closed. So what that denotes? That particular symbol denotes that let justice be done though the heaven fall. So doesn't matter whether what is happening, if there is extreme destruction, doesn't matter. Justice is justice. And there is a famous Bollywood movie few decades back, that was Andha Kanun. So the same thing, same analogy is drawn there also. And now let's move on to a little philosophical discussion, that is when we talk about deontological ethics, then we have to go back to Immanuel Kant. And Immanuel Kant is one of the great, you can say, Western political thinker based on Germany. And for him, deontology is an ethical theory that uses rulers to distinguish right from the wrong. So basically this point is already highlighted when I was discussing the earlier parts, earlier arguments. So Kant's belief is that he rejected the teleological statements and arguments, and he firmly believed that deontological theory, it's after all, it's an ethical theory, and it is based on certain universal principles of ethics, and it is that ethical actions which follow universal moral action. For example, don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. In Bengal also, we in our pre-primary days, then our parents used to try to ethically motivate us, and like porashuno kore je gari ghoda chore she, or some same kind of proverbial knowledge that we gathered at that point of time. So don't lie. That this is also something which we acquired at our early childhood, right? Don't lie. So if I asked you, if I lie, then what would happen? Nothing would happen. As I said a little while ago, this entire world is composed of binary. So if someone lies, then definitely someone is truth bound. So there is lie, there is truth. It is your choice what to do and why you should not lie, because virtue is a reward in itself, and your tendency would be towards that particular virtue. Since you would definitely want to become virtuous, and in order to become virtuous, you shall have to be truth bound. That is why there is this differentiation between truth and lie. You should always tell the truth, and that is why in our early childhood this particular universal notion was tried to be incorporated into our knowledge system, that don't lie. Similarly, don't steal. You should not steal. In fact, there are a lot of stories that we heard of at our early childhood, that we should, and in fact there is a certain definition of stealing. If I take something without the permission of the other person, then that act would be the act of stealing. So this is a kind of definition which also we also learned this at our early childhood. In fact, similarly, then don't cheat, and then cheating is also a crime, but still in examinations it's an act which is widely used. But don't cheat, this is also sort of universal principle. So Kant used to say that these are some ethical actions which are different from the other ethical actions. So there are a lot of ethical actions in the entire world, but these are the few examples of ethical actions which are qualitatively different from the other actions. What it denotes? It denotes that these actions have universal validity, or you could say there is a sort of universality in these sort of ethics, deontological. That is why these are called deontological ethics. That you should not do these things. So, for example, the example is already given that a few minutes ago I said that killing someone for your defense is also a murder. So you cannot say that in my self-defense I have killed somebody. still it is a crime. If even if you murder someone for your defense, for the sake of your defense, still that act should be regarded as a murder. Okay, so deontology is that kind of an argument. So now let's move little bit on the characteristics of deontology or deontological logic. So first is that right or moral right is defined independently of moral good. Okay, so first thing is that moral right is defined here independent of moral good. So there is this difference between moral right and moral good. So moral good, when you say moral good, it is the consequence, right? For the sake of the humanity, you can say this is moral good, for good for all. It's a good life, you can say. These are the, when it is concerned about the fruits or consequences of a particular event. And when you say moral right, right doesn't mean here the you can say it is right means the proper. Okay, so moral right means when you are doing things rightly or properly, perfectly, exactly. So this is the meaning of right here. So moral right means the means. Moral right refers to the means. So moral right is independent of moral good. I mean that means the means is independent of the consequences. So you are forgetting about the consequences and just concentrating on the means. So the act here is important, not the result which is coming out of that act. That is why I always said that deontological logic is not result bound. It is only about, for example, you are giving examinations. You are appearing in examinations for good results. So good marks. So good marks is the result or consequence. But if you are more concentrating more on good results or excellent results, then definitely your examination is going to be affected. So that is why if you are concentrating more and more on examinations, then excellent result will automatically happen. That is why deontological logic says that that particular act of examination is independent of the excellent result. So that is why a person or citizens in a particular land should be concerned much about their duties or constitutional obligations, not about the acts. So acts which are coming out of their obligations or their duties that they are bound are not important or significant. But significant thing is that the citizens are, whether the citizens are duty bound or not. If they are duty bound, then definitely the act coming out of that would be good. Okay, so this is the implication of that. The second one is that the actually deontological ethics generates categorical imperative. Now this is new, categorical imperative. And what is categorical imperative? Let me say that categorical, this particular term, categorical imperative, this is coined by Immanuel Kant. Okay, so it means that categorical imperative is duty independent of any theory of good, which I have stated that it is only about duty, you have to do your duty, or it's only about doing duty independent of universal good. Universal good would happen automatically, but you have, first thing that you have to do is to obey the rules, regulations, laws of a particular land. So overall, deontology says that whether an action is good or bad depends on some quality of action itself. Okay, so this is the precision of the entire discussion that I have done. Is it means that deontology puts it like that: whether an action is good or bad depends upon some quality of action itself. So the quality of action is more important, and quality means good or bad. Quality means it is whether it is perfect or imperfect. Or I just said that there is this binary, whether it is good or bad. So quality judgment means good or bad. Okay, it is not like in Bengali mota muti. There is nothing mota muti. It's either it should be good or bad. So quality judgment. So when you are doing any act, when in fact you are doing your duty, you have to be sure about whether it is good or bad. In fact, when these constitutional obligations are made, are constructed, then this factor is taken into account. In any particular democratic regime, you could see that the constitutional obligation for citizens are already legally stated, and in that this factor, whether it is good, whether it will serve the interest of the common people of the land or not, all these factors are already taken into consideration. So your job would be to do your duty according to the constitutions, according to the constitution of the land. So there lies this deontological logic. Now let us mention few categories of deontological ethics. So there are in fact two types of deontological ethics. Okay, one is act deontological theory. Act deontological theory, it includes the situational ethics and existentialism. So these are very two large areas. One is situational ethics, one is existentialism, and both comes within this umbrella of act deontological theory. And second one is rule deontological theories. Rule deontological theories, it includes categorical imperative, as Kant puts it, and divine command, or you can say natural laws theory. So divine command means divine origin of state, and the natural rights theories or natural law theories means Hobbesian or Lockean contract theories. Okay, and Kant's perspective is already mentioned. Just I have little while ago I was talking about categorical imperative. So basically, first thing, which is act deontological theory, which includes situational ethics and existentialism. Now, existentialism is something which is very, very important. You have heard of positivism. So, and existentialism means the existence would be considered to those which are perceivable through human senses. We have 5 different senses through which we can perceive the existence. So whatever are perceivable through these 5 different human senses are to be considered as existence. Beyond that, there would be nothing which can be called as existence. So existentialism is revolving around these particular or this precise notion of the existence. So it is non-transcendental by nature. Non-transcendental because you have a particular boundary about your knowledge. You have a boundary of your knowledge because your knowledge is delimited to this ambience of human senses, which human senses could perceive a limit, right? Beyond that limit you cannot cross. Therefore, that is why I said it is non-transcendental by nature. And situational ethics is that, look, you have 2 ethics which always occur while taking decisions. In fact, if you are maybe you are traveling by a bus and you have seen someone is trying to cross a road, but nobody is helping that particular person, then you just say the driver that please stop, and then you came down from the bus and you tried to help that particular person. But at the same time you had examinations and you were already late. So if that particular bus driver drove the bus in that same speed, then you could definitely, there is a chance of reaching to the examination center at time. But you have taken the decision the other way. Why? Because you thought that examinations, actually for that particular date examination was your end, but you took the decisions for the sake of the situational ethics. Your situational ethics is that you have to first help that particular person crossing the road. That was not the primary target, although, but you took that decisions based on your situational ethics. Situational ethics means it is the ethics or ethical consideration which comes out of a particular situation. It is not your end for the day. For your your job was to go reach the examination center, rather than helping someone at the midst of your journey. So that is why situational ethics, this is also a kind of deontological ethics or deontological theory. And then the second one was rule deontological theories, which I have covered. The categorical imperative that I was talking about, and the divine command and natural right theories, and some other teachers who are involved in this lecture series, they have already covered, or maybe they are covering Hobbes, Locke and their theories of states origin. So basically I am not wasting much time into and going deeper into that. But now let us talk about the three different types of ethics. Okay. In fact, there are three different types of ethics, and first one is meta ethics, second one is normative ethics, and third one is applied ethics. First one is meta ethics, then there is normative ethics, then is applied ethics. And before moving on to much deeper into that, let me clarify one thing, that look, reason, every knowledge, acquiring knowledge depends upon reason. If you don't have reason, then you will not probably acquire knowledge. So reasons are also of three types, right? One is instrumental reason, second one is virtual reason or virtue reason, or third one is you can say communicative reason. Okay, communicative reason. And similarly, meta ethics here it denotes the universality. A deontological ethics is also comes within this meta ethics. Then there is normative ethics. This is the situational ethics also comes within this particular ethics. And then there is applied ethics. A teleological ethics, you could see, is an example of applied ethics. So we have absolutely no time to spend much time into this categorization, because this is a different sort of discussion about ethics, and we are not dealing ethics at this point of time. But now there is another question that I have to address moving on, that is how to apply deontological ethics. This is a very, very important thing, because you all are the students of law, and when we have learned something, then we have to apply it in our regular life, without which there would be you can say no validity of that particular knowledge if it is not applicable. So applying deontological ethics is very, very important. That is why there are you can say 4 points that I am going to mention through which you could apply deontological ethics. Now, how to apply deontological ethics? That was my primary concern. So the first thing that you have to do is that, I would say, do the right thing. In order to apply deontological ethics in your regular life, first thing that you have to do is that you have to do the right thing. So in order to do this, you have to differentiate between right and wrong. If you are able to differentiate between right and wrong, then you could easily apply deontological ethics in your life. And then second one is, and life doesn't mean that your entire life also, everywhere. Life involves every you can say facet of your entire life. So it is not only about your political participation or your political obligation towards a particular state, but also in your daily life you could also apply this. So first thing that you have to do is that do the right thing. Then the second one is that do it because it is the right thing to do. Now, if someone says that do the right thing, and definitely there are a lot of in line who have already suggested you to do right thing in your life. Now, you would definitely ask to that particular person that why should I do the right thing? The answer would be, do it because it is the right thing to do. That is why I said that you have to be virtuous for the sake of virtue. The same thing, you have to do karma for the karma. The same thing, you have do it because it is the right thing to do. You have to be virtuous because virtue is reward in itself. Same thing, you have to do the right thing because it is the right thing. Okay, then this is the logic, and this is called the deontological logic. The third one is the do not do the wrong thing. Do not do the wrong things. And again you would ask, why should not I do the wrong things? The answer would be, avoid them because they are wrong. Avoid them because they are wrong. Ignore them because they are wrong. So first statement was followed by the second one, and the third one was followed by the fourth one. So if first one there is a question, then that question is resolved in the second one. Then in the third one there is a question, then again it is resolved in the fourth one, right? So now let me clarify another important idea by Immanuel Kant, and in this way we could finish very shortly, that Kant's idea of golden rule. Now Kant is known for this particular idea of golden rule. In fact, before moving much into this golden rule, let me tell you a little bit about Immanuel Kant, because look, Immanuel Kant, you can say easily that he is a kind of transcendental idealist. And little while ago I just used this particular term, transcendental. Transcendental means when you are going beyond the boundaries. Transcendental means when there is limitless, there is a question. There is a question after the answer. If you have a kind of exploratory mind always, then definitely your thought process will be called transcendental. If you have question always, then definitely you are looking for answers. And when you are looking for answers means you are looking for knowledge. And when you are looking for knowledge, then you are not believing in horizons. And someone who is not believing in horizon is transcendental. Okay, this is the logic. So earlier I said that the existentialists, they are non-transcendental by nature, because they believe that there is a certain ambience of this existence. But like Immanuel Kant, the philosophers who are like Immanuel Kant, they believe they are idealists first of all, and their idealism is a transcendental idealism, because they always look for questions. And why? Because they are dialecticians. So Kant's dialectics means that little while ago I said that in this existence, human existence, or you can say this entire creation, there are things are in the form of binary. Okay, so when you are just considering this creation, then definitely you have to understand this binary. And there is a kind of dialectical relationship between these binary. In fact, if there is a marriage ceremony to attend, and just before going to attend that marriage ceremony, you used to do one regular thing. That is that you definitely would stand in front of a mirror, and you try to sorting things out. My hair should be like this, my lips should be like this, my earring should be like this, or everything should be perfect, because otherwise attending that marriage ceremony will not do anything. So that will provide you some sort of mental satisfaction. And look, but if I question you, when you are just preparing to attend that marriage ceremony, and when you have already attended the marriage ceremony, is there any changes in yourself? There is no change. There is absolutely no change in yourself. But whatever change is there, that is in your outer body. This is the exterior change, you could say. But as far as your interior identity is concerned, you are the very person who was always there. So you are not going. Your interior is not changing, but your exterior is changing. And why you are changing your exterior every now and then, understanding that your interior is not going to change. You know it very well that as a person you will not change, but your exterior is going to be dynamic. Always it is changeable. You are wearing something today, you will wear something tomorrow, and day after that you will be wearing something else. So there is this dialectics between your essence and your appearance. Essence means your interior, okay, and that essence is permanent and it is not going to change. But whatever change will happen, that is going to happen in your exterior. That is your appearance, how you have appeared, okay, and you are appearing before the world in different forms always. So that is why I said that this dialectical relationship is always there between these two binaries. One is your essence, one is your appearance, and that is why from that there on, let me clarify this particular categorical imperative, because golden rule is nothing but the renaming of categorical imperative according to Kant, and it is basically that act as you want. But I would say you to be categorical, follower of categorical imperative, is that act as you want all other people to act towards all other people. In fact, this is a logical statement, that act as you want all other people to act towards all other people. So you have to act according to the fact that how people should act with others. You have to behave like this, that how people should behave with others. So this is the logic, okay. So, and you have learned already, we all have learned this from our childhood. We try to learn from our parents that how to behave with people, and we try to take this as a essence in our life, that how should a particular person act, or you could say behave perfectly with other persons. So this is the logic here, that you have to act as you want all other people to act towards all other people. So act according to the maxim that you would wish all other rational people to follow. You have a responsibility, because duty without responsibility will not do anything. When you are doing your duty, deontological logic says that you are duty bound. Then when you are doing your duty, then you are exemplary in yourself. Okay, so you are doing your duty in such a fashion that you have a kind of you can say you know conviction that this act that I am performing will be followed by other people. So I have a particular responsibility in behaving like that manner. So Kant was talking about two different types of categorical imperatives. One is universal, and then there is the you can say impersonal. So one is universal and second one is impartial. So first thing is that universal categorical imperative. That means the universal ethics that I said, don't lie or same sort of things. And then there is impartial. Impartial means non-biased. You have to be non-biased always, like Libra, a kind of Libra. That is why that symbol is used in quotes. Okay, so first, in order to become categorical imperative, then you have to do these two things. And whatever I have talked about Kant, for that these ideas are explained and you can say analyzed in his three famous publications. One is Critique of Pure Reason, one is Critique of Practical Reason, and one is Critique of Judgment. One is Critique of Pure Reason, then Critique of Practical Reason, then Critique of Judgment. And I have already mentioned about transcendental idealism of Kant. For all these reasons that I have discussed, Kant is regarded as the transcendental idealist. Or you could say Kant's approach is a synthetic approach to know a physical world, to knowledge about the physical world. And that is why Kant mentioned about 12 different categories of factors, or 12 different categories of factors which he said that philosophy cannot explain or understand. Philosophy has its own boundaries, and these are the transcendental factors, you can say 12 transcendental factors which cannot covered by philosophy. One or first three that I am going to mention is about quantity, and these are unity, plurality and totality. Unity, plurality and totality. These are all are concerned about quantity, and these are transcendental factors. Then there is quality. In quality there are three factors: reality, negation and limitation. Reality, negation and limitation. These three are comes under quality. Then there is community and relation. Then there is inherence and substance. Then there is possibility and impossibility. Then there is existence and non-existence. All are binary, you could see. Then there is necessity. Then there is contingency. So these are the 12 different transcendental factors that Kant talked about. So now, if we wind up this discussion, then what we have found that this deontological theory to understand political obligation, we have covered the philosophical origin, etymological origin, and different categories and logics. Why should we be categorically imperative in Kant's words? And finally, in a particular, how to apply this deontological ethics in our life, that is also covered. But the fundamental thing which should be mentioned again that in a polity like us, or in democratic polity, this is very, very important, very, very important, alongside the teleological logic. Because if you go by the teleological logic, then there is absolute chance of chaos, and there is absolute chance of violation of acts. Because why deontological logic would serve better compared to teleological logic is in the fact that if you go by the teleological logic, then you always try to justify your act by your arguments. In the courtroom drama, then there will be much importance given to the arguments rather than the substances, or you could say evidences. So because evidences and if arguments are taken more into consideration, then what will happen? Then there will be long cases, and everybody will try to prove themselves for the sake of the good, common good, that I have murdered that particular person for the sake of common good. And that can easily be established. That can easily be established by using different logics. And ultimately, the justice will be delayed, and in fact, sometimes justice will be altered, and justice will not happen in reality. And that is why this particular deontological logic is much more important, because it is more evidence based. Because what you are doing actually, the act itself, you are judging the act, you are not judging the results. When you are judging the acts, then there lies the question of justice. So if your act is justified, then it is much easier for courts to verdict over that particular case. So there will be lesser importance on arguments, and there will be much more importance on substantial evidences. So that is why the implication of deontological logic in our in daily life reality is much more than compared to the other theories. So that is the end of my lecture for the day. I have already given the reference for this part, and after reading this and after this lecture, if still you have anything to ask, then you could ask. You have 8 minutes.